In the summer of 2010, I was lonelier than ever. There were no friends or parents around. That's because when I turned 18, I left my parents' home in search of myself. I traveled a lot, as I liked to learn many new things and generally liked a mobile lifestyle. In fact, not only did I not date anyone, but I actively avoided anything that felt like it. Over a year ago, I gave up on relationships completely and promised myself that I would spend my next few years as a bachelor to focus solely on myself, my career, and my plans to travel the world. I traveled to different countries, sometimes by myself, sometimes with some companies of tourists like me. I liked different ways to travel: simple transportation, planes, and even ships. 4 months after I moved to Singapore, my roommate at the time decided to leave and return to America. Since his apartment belonged to his company, they probably didn't want me to stay there. I had to find a new place to live. I was forced to do this because some people from his company came to me and told me that I had to leave the apartment as soon as possible. There was no limit to my indignation because I never violated the terms of the contract, and on the contrary, I behaved calmly and respectfully towards my neighbors. I always paid the rent on time, and it seemed to me that no one had the right to evict me. But as always, there was one hitch. It was written in the contract, as always, where at the very end and in almost the smallest font, that I had to evict if I was not a member of the company or if a representative of the company was being evicted. I then asked them to give me some time to find a new place to live, as this was not a quick matter. I had to quickly open the internet and dig through the local newspapers to find a suitable new apartment. And then in November, my promise to be single went out the window on the 44th floor. I met my future fiancé. As luck would have it, I fell in love with the very first apartment I saw. It was a brand new, newly built place on the 44th floor of a 50-story building with a gorgeous view of the city. There was a lot to love. The previous place had a view of other people's houses, which was pretty boring for me since I also loved taking pictures. In this house, the sun was setting right in front of my balcony, and I had the opportunity to take the most wonderful pictures ever. The apartment itself was very spacious with state-of-the-art technology and kitchen, and most importantly, it was quite affordable. My other roommates were a Scottish architect, a British manager, and an American. None of us were in a rush to get anywhere, so the 4 of us got along so well that we often hung out in the apartment every night after work. The guys were kind and never made any noise, and I especially liked that if I asked them to keep the music down or make other noises to work, they apologized and complied with my request. On my part, it just happened that way on its own. We never fought. On the contrary, we had fun, and the atmosphere in our house was calm, relaxed, and comfortable. In matters of everyday life, we always found a compromise or made an agreement so that everyone was comfortable. We became friends fairly quickly as we had common interests with some of them, so we always knew what to talk about and what to discuss. The Scottish architect, for example, colorfully described his country in a way that made me want to visit it, and I did later. He told us about the intricacies of his work, and we listened with interest, sometimes asking questions about the details that interested us. The Briton also talked about England and its people, and showed us his photos that he personally took there. It turns out that he also liked to take pictures of everything he sees around him, like me, in fact. The American told his story of how he came to be here and what his goals were. To be honest, I was beginning to feel like we were old acquaintances rather than roommates who had just met the other day. That's how I met my future husband, that British guy. His name was Mike, and he had moved to Singapore 10 days earlier. Over the next few weeks, I tried to spend as much time with him as possible. Not because I liked him. Remember, I turned off that part of my brain. But as an immigrant, I knew how hard it was to make friends in a new city. So every time I was going out to dinner or drinks with friends, I invited him along. After a couple of weeks of hanging out in groups, we started spending time together. We spent whole days together, just walking around town and talking about nothing and everything at once. We went to different places in the town we lived in, and since I had spent a little more time here than he had, I was able to show him some sites he hadn't been to yet. Mike listened with interest to my stories of past travels and how I ended up here. He, on the other hand, was here for a fairly simple reason: work. The company had sent him here for some important negotiations. We really had a lot to talk about besides our hobbies and our lives. We could talk about the same thing all day long, but from different angles, so to speak. I liked it though. I loved looking at his enthusiastic eyes when he talked about his work. I realized that he really loved his profession. Of course, it didn't take us long to realize that we had feelings for each other, but we didn't want to do anything about them because we were roommates and were afraid that our sudden feelings might interfere with our lives. We didn't want to create an unnecessarily difficult situation. Seriously, this apartment was awesome. Neither of us wanted to jeopardize our place in it, and we didn't want to scare the other two roommates. I was sure if we started to show our relationship openly, our neighbors, an American and a Scotsman, would simply feel uncomfortable. We didn't want to break up our friendly relationship with them, so we just lived as before, trying not to give ourselves away. But living together only made us realize how amazingly compatible we were. We were both passionate about technology, and there were lots of things we both liked, and our other two roommates didn't mind. In fact, despite our adamant denials, they were convinced that we had started dating long before we told them about it. So less than 3 weeks after we moved in, we decided to give this thing a chance, just to see what it would boil down to. Our message to our roommates was something like this: Hey guys, just so you know, we're dating. We hope this doesn't put you in a tough spot. That's not news. You guys have been dating for weeks. The guys didn't mind and just made fun of us, which let me know that they didn't feel uncomfortable at all, and if they made jokes about it, then it was okay. My heart felt better. No one objected, and the four of us continued to live as before, getting together in the evenings and having fun. 2 months later, during the Chinese New Year vacations, we went on our first vacation together to Bali, and of all places, perhaps the most romantic island in Southeast Asia. I was a little apprehensive. It had only been 2 months, and here we were, sinking or swimming. Unknown. If the trip failed, one of us would probably have to find a new place to live once we got back to Singapore. But Bali went surprisingly well. So did our many trips to Thailand, Vietnam, China, and even the miserable rainforests in Malaysia, where I did almost nothing but run away from mosquitoes all weekend. By the end of that first year, we had lived together longer than we had met, and we had traveled together just as long. We couldn't remember what life had been like before we met. I couldn't believe that we had found each other in a country thousands of miles away from our families. I even got the feeling that we were born for each other, so compatible and good together. At times, when he was away on business or at work, I felt hard at heart and realized that this was true love when he wasn't around, and I was starting to miss him. But I knew I had to move on. I wasn't going to stay in Singapore for more than a year. I may have broken my promise to stay single, but I wasn't going to break the part about traveling in my next 20 years. So I went to Australia for 5 weeks and then moved to Paris this January. We didn't even have to talk about what was going to happen to us. We knew we were going to stay together, and there was no question. In May of this year, Mike came to Paris and proposed the day I was born. We set a wedding date when we started living together again. There was no limit to our happiness. Despite our long separations, we continued to talk on the phone, and our relationship only grew stronger every day. Later, we started traveling the world together and learning about different cultures and traditions just together. So many people say that dating while traveling is impossible. Dating another immigrant is impossible. Dating from a distance is impossible. I'm sharing our story to tell you that sometimes it is still possible.